Welcome back to the channel, my friends. On today's video, we are going to be doing a complete brake job on this Range Rover L322. We are going to be replacing the rotors and pads, fronts and rears, but I think we'll keep the front and rear in separate video just to make it a little easier and keeping the video nice and short and easy to follow. So we'll attack the fronts first. So we got the vehicle in off-road mode, hood's cracked open, and let's get started. So we have the vehicle on jack stands, wheels off. Obviously the brakes are Brembos on the front. In my case, I am replacing rotors and pads. All you need to do is remove these pins. You want to take a punch like this and a hammer and punch these pins out. There's one up here, one at the bottom here. This clip will come out. Again, you want to take this punch and remove this pin completely out that way, and that will relieve the pads, and you're able to pull them out just out this way. So let's go ahead and get that done. Here I was able to remove the bottom pin here. Remember, they are under a bit of a spring tension from this clip. Kind of bends over the pads, and the pins are what holds the clip in. So with both of these pins removed, just like you are able to remove the pads out just like this. Sometimes they get kind of wedged in there. You want to take a screwdriver, pry bar, wedge it in between the pad and the caliper and kind of pry back and forth. That'll force the pistons back and give it some gap for the pads to be removed. So we'll get both of these pads removed from here. Also completed the same thing on the passenger side here on the front. The only difference on this side is going to be there is a sensor wire, a wear sensor that's on the driver's side pad. That just pulls out. Really not much that holds it. You do want to take the bleeder cap off and remove this. So if you are removing the caliper, caliper is not going to be hanging off of this sensor wire. Next thing that we're going to do is remove the caliper from the knuckle. Now the bolts that hold the caliper are behind. Here, obviously, there's two 16mm bolts. There's one here and also one at the bottom here. Now you want to take a piece of a hanger wire or some type of a tie to tie the caliper off to the strut or the control arm, so you're not hanging the caliper from the brake hose and chancing that to break. So I was able to remove 18mm bolts from the back of the caliper here, from the knuckle to the caliper, and remove the caliper. These calipers are actually aluminum. They're fairly light. What we'll do is we'll take a piece of wire like this and just hook it and let it hang off the strut or the frame somewhere, and we'll get these cleaned up. We have the caliper all cleaned up. One thing that does help is actually just a 5-gallon bucket underneath the caliper instead of hanging it with a wire. But our next step is going to be removing the rotor. Now the only thing that holds a rotor on, at least if you still have one, there's an Allen bolt in here. You'll see it indented into the rotor. There's only one. Now what it takes to remove that is a 6mm Allen. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And that is a sleeved screw that holds the rotor onto the hub. Now sometimes these will tend to seize in. Obviously this has anti-seize on it. Now if you run into that case where that bolt is stripping, it doesn't want to come off, you want to stop at that point and use a tool like this. This is an impact driver. So you'll put your 8mm Allen socket in front of this driver just like this. Put that on there and smack it with a hammer, and this will get it to turn to where it won't strip, and you will break it free with that before you start stripping it by hand or using an impact gun like I was using. So that's a good tool to have. Like I said, it's very common for those to seize, and just so you know, those do not have to go back on if you don't want. If you do put those on, you want to put some anti-seize on them. The only reason they put them on at the factory is to hold the rotor to the hub, so as they're going down assembly line, rotors are not falling off before the calipers are on. Otherwise, as soon as the wheel goes on, that's what holds the rotor onto the hub. But those screws will help. So at this point, we'll repeat the same process on the other side, get the rotors off, we'll get the new rotors and pads, and we'll start assembling everything back together. So now that we have the rotor removed from the hub, before we install new rotors, you want to take a drill with the wire brush like this and make sure we have a nice clean surface for the new rotor to seat against. I have the hub all cleaned up, wire wheel, and I just brushed on some anti-seize onto the hub and around the ring here. So your new rotor, especially if you are in the Midwest or some of the salty conditions, your new rotor is not going to seize onto the hub. And that does happen, and that can be a task just to remove those then. So that prevents that. So some anti-seize helps. And I will put all these parts, all the tools in the description for you. Feel free to ask if I miss anything. Drilled and slotted rotors, compare their old ones. Same thing really. Now if you've been kind of following me at all, you know I like to coat, paint everything. Last time when I did these about 4 or 5 years ago, I did paint the hats and the edges on these rotors black. But I think on the new ones, I'm going to leave them alone. These are zinc coated, but I did clear coat everything as far as the top, the back, and the edge. And I think I'm going to keep them that color this time. But clear coating them will save them. Kind of like this here. You can see where it's come off. Had I not painted these black, that would be all rusted by now. So it's a good idea to coat them. Again, that's up to you. You can choose the color that you want. And I'll put some of that stuff again in the description for you. Here we have the rotor back onto the vehicle. Don't forget to put the hole bolt or the screw right back in here. Again, anti-seize will help. If you tore it up, taking it out, it's not a big deal. You can leave those out. Not necessary to have them. They're just there to hold the rotor. It does help though when you're putting the rotor and pads back in. It helps to hold the rotor back on. But then again, you can just use one of the lug nuts to accomplish the same thing. Either way, I think next I'm going to refresh my calipers here a little bit. They got some nicks and scratches in them. I'll retouch those back up and we'll get the calipers and pads back on. Since these calipers were painted before, all we really had to do was retouch up the outside part that you can see. And now they'll stay clean for a long time. That's just cherry red paint, enamel I'm using, and a few coats of clear over it will keep it clean. Here's the other side I did the same thing with. So now that we've got the calipers coated, we can go ahead and put them back on. Rotors are on. Now I just have it hanging there with one bolt. I was able to clean these up too and paint them with flat black. Before you put the calipers on, it is a good idea to squeeze these pistons back in. The best way is I usually, when it's off of the vehicle, I take a 2x4, clamp it on here with a C-clamp or what have you, so this side does not move, and then you can push. You can take the old pad if you like, or a piece of wood, and you can also clamp that on and squeeze both of the pistons in. You have to kind of have one side locked in, otherwise if you push one side, the others want to come out, so you got to have one side locked in when you're pushing those two in. With our caliper in position and secured, we are ready to go ahead and install the pads. I have the pads sitting here. Another thing that's going to help is some type of a lube. I have Siliglide here. You can use this product. I'll also put that in the description. Or if that's not available, you can use any type of a high temperature grease. We have our pins and our clip. I have all those cleaned up and wire brushed. So to install the pads, you want to make sure the pistons are all the way in. So we'll do it one side at a time. So we'll do the inner first. You want to take a curved pry bar like this and wedge it between the rotor and make sure the piston is pushed in all the way. Now these calipers have 4 pistons, 2 on the outside and 2 on the inside. It might help you to take 2 pry bars at the same time on one side so you can push both in. Otherwise, when you try to push one in, the other will push out. You can definitely go back and forth and complete it that way also. Before you put the pads on, you want to lubricate all the contact points. One is this edge here on both sides. You want to put some Siliglide or brake lube on that side. You also want to put brake lube on the back where the piston contacts the pad itself. So I do have the inner pad here with lubrication on both sides, top and bottom, and the back where the piston contacts. And then you could just slide it into position here just like so. Obviously the friction side will go towards the rotor, and once you have it in, you want to just go ahead and slide that into position. All you really are doing is matching up these holes with these pin holes on the outside and the inside, because there will be a pin and a clip installed. Now that we got the inner in, we'll achieve the same thing on the outer here. First we'll take our pry bar and make sure these pistons are in all the way so you can fit our pad. Once you have both of the pads in position, you can take one of the pins. You can either do top or the bottom. Go ahead and line that up, and we'll get that hammered in, making sure it's going through the pads, the holes in the pad backing, and locking into the caliper. We'll go ahead and make sure that locks in all the way. Your top pin and the pad's in place. I have the lower pin just inserted in the back. You want to take your spring clip here, insert it through the top under the pin. This is something obviously that's going to take two hands. You want to squeeze that down and get the other pin over and lock that one in also. Again, it'll be under some tension, but it's not that bad to do. I was able to hold that spring clip down and also lock in the bottom pin. So both pads are in, everything's lubricated, nothing's binding up. We are in good shape. Now we just need to repeat the same process on the other side. Now the driver's side is the same process. The only difference on this side is that there is a wear indicator sensor on this pad. Make sure you route that through the hole here, and then it plugs into the cap on the bleeder cap, and it just spring clips right into the pad. There's a little edge, and all the pads have them, just like this one here. Again, it goes on the inner pad on the driver's side. So at this time, the front brake job on this truck is complete. All we got left to do is put the wheels back on and test drive the vehicle. Once you have the wheels and tires back on the vehicle, before you put the vehicle in drive, you want to go ahead and depress the brake pedal a few times until you have a firm pedal. Now, I will also be replacing the rear pads on this truck. Those are not Brembos on these earlier Range Rovers. They are TRW, I believe. But again, we'll keep that as a separate video. Stay tuned for that. I thank you for watching.